Hey, good morning, folks. Pastor Stephen back again with another No Frills daily devotional. And today's topic is spiritual appetites, because I've been talking a lot about carnal appetites and spiritual appetites. And I had this thought pop into my brain, but Stephen, do people actually know what spiritual appetites are? And so if you're sitting here with a question right now going, well, you're not sitting here, I'm sitting here. But if you're sitting there, wherever you are, with that question of what in the world is a spiritual appetite, well, buckle up, Buttercup, because hopefully this episode is going to help to explain this, because Jesus wants to satisfy and he wants to cultivate spiritual appetites within us. All right, that's what he came to do when he is having this conversation that I've been talking to you about in John chapter 6 with his followers. He's trying to get them to realize that they have been chasing the wrong appetites in their life. When he's in this argument with them about being the bread of life, and them wanting just some real bread because they're hungry, right? He's engaging in this conversation. He's trying to get them to be aware that they have spiritual appetites. And he's trying to get them to realize that they've been trying to feed those spiritual appetites with the wrong thing, which is a problem that has plagued humanity forever, okay? And so what is a spiritual appetite, Stephen? A spiritual appetite, if I could give you a simple definition, it is anything that's intended to feed what our spirit naturally craves. And I'll try to give you some examples of this, because you might be sitting here going, well, okay, great definition, but do I even have a spiritual appetite? And the answer is yes. You've been created to be spirit, soul, mind, body, right? And so spirit is one of those key components that makes you who you are. And so you might be sitting here going, do I even have one? Yes, you do. The problem is, though, if you're like most people, that your spiritual appetites are starved, or they are just completely ignored, because we tend to not be aware of them. And usually what we do is we stifle them by feeding them the wrong thing. And I'm going to show you something in scripture that I was seeing again in John chapter 6. And this is John chapter 6, verse 63. Jesus is closing out his argument with the people. He's talking about him needing to be what they truly desire. He's talking about how true satisfaction is only found in him. And he leaves them with this. And this is John 6:63. The Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. And what Jesus is trying to do is he's trying to put into perspective what they've been missing all along. It's that they've got this spiritual craving, these spiritual appetites that are within them that have been stifled for far too long. All right. And so let me talk a little bit more about these. And throughout history, these spiritual appetites have been given different names. Some people, you'll hear them call them the disciplines. Some people will call them spiritual practices. Okay, Saint Ignatius of Loyola called them spiritual exercises. Okay, but whatever they're called, it doesn't matter, because from Jesus to Ignatius to today, they're all meant to do the same thing. They're meant to put the desires of our flesh in the background of our lives. Okay. So give us the list then, Stephen, right? Give us this. So what are some of the spiritual disciplines or spiritual appetites? Okay. Selfless love is a spiritual appetite. Purity is a spiritual appetite. Generosity is a spiritual appetite. Scripture is a spiritual appetite. Prayer is a spiritual appetite. Fasting is a spiritual appetite. Stewardship is a spiritual appetite. Service is a spiritual appetite. And the list actually goes on and on and on. And now where does this list come from, right? Because, okay, so Jesus talks about it, okay? Definitely. And St. Ignatius talks about it definitely in his book. But the reality is all of these come from the life that Jesus modeled for us. Okay, that's where these habits or these practices or these exercises or these disciplines come from. They come from the life that Jesus modeled for us. And what we tend to do in Christianity is we tend to take the life of Jesus and put that in its own place and say that's the life that Jesus lived so that we can go to heaven. But the reality is, that's the life that Jesus lived so that you and I know how that we are supposed to live. Because the Jesus life, okay, these disciplines, these practices, they encompass or embody what the Jesus life is. And what's hard about these disciplines or these practices is they contradict and they war against what our flesh desires, right? Because if a spiritual discipline is purity, well, what does your flesh want? Your flesh wants sex, right? But the spiritual discipline is purity. A spiritual discipline is generosity, where you're giving things away. Well, what's your flesh want? Your flesh wants to take things away, right? A spiritual discipline is selfless love, sacrificially loving somebody like an enemy. And what does your flesh want to do? It wants to punch the guy in the face, right? And so they are at war with our flesh, and they contradict our flesh, and they embody or encompass the life that Jesus lived. But here's the deal. This Jesus life, these disciplines, these practices, they are the only life, and they are the only path and the only way to achieve what's called true fulfillment, right? Because why is that though? Why is that, Stephen? It's because it's the life that we were called to live. We've got to stop separating the Jesus life and say, well, that was good for him. And that's the life that he was meant to live so that I can go to heaven. No, that's the life that you and I are called to live so that we can experience true fulfillment for the life that we have been called to on this side of eternity. Hey, you guys, have an awesome, awesome day and be blessed.